Football Manager 2025 has been cancelled. To paraphrase their statement, the game isn't in a state that they'd be happy to release, and it's too far away from the high standards their audience expects. All their efforts are now going into FM26. This is not the news I was expecting, especially at 2:34 AM on a Friday. Now, I don't think the game being cancelled is bad, and we'll get into that later on in the video. But the way the whole process has been handled is pretty bad. Trust is hard-earned and easily lost, and I think a lot of people have lost a lot of trust with Sports Interactive. So let's break down what happened. The first mention of FM25 came in June 2023 when the studio head Miles Jacobson announced FM25 would be moving from their own in-house engine to Unity. For years, FM has just used its own in-house engine, which they've reached the ceiling of. If they want to develop the game further, they've got to either build a new engine or move to something new. So they chose to move to Unity, which is a very popular and well-used game engine. After starting work in 2020 with the aim of using Unity for FM22, a mixture of the pandemic and the development taking longer than anticipated meant the Unity upgrade was delayed until FM25. On September 30th, 2024, FM25 was officially announced and pre-orders opened for a release date of November 26th. Then, less than 2 weeks later, the game was delayed until March 2025. We will get more information on it by the end of January. The end of January came and went and there was no news, and now in early February, the game has been cancelled. This video has been really difficult to make because after all the delays and lack of communication, I just feel really apathetic to the whole situation. I'm beyond caring, really. And for someone who has made a full-time job out of making Football Manager content on YouTube, for me to feel apathetic at the game being cancelled shows just how much of a disaster this whole thing has been. Especially because Sports Interactive made a big song and dance about being more transparent moving forwards, and they've kind of just not been transparent at all. Now, having taken time to digest the news, I do think overall it's a good thing that FM25 has been cancelled. You see so many instances these days of games being released too early before they're finished. For example, this past week, Civilization 7 came out. It's a franchise that I love, but the reviews are absolutely terrible because there are so many bugs in the game, it's not quite fully there. But it has caused some pretty bad damage to Firaxis, the guys who make Civilization 7, and it's going to take them a long time to recover. And had Football Manager released in a very buggy state, the same thing could have been true for them. Cancelling the game also going to cause a massive issue to Football Manager on the balance sheet, but clearly their parent company Sega are happy to take that hit. We'll talk more about it later on as well, but had they released this game broken, it may well have been the end of Football Manager. And it also shows that Sega have a lot of faith in Sports Interactive to actually put together a great game for FM26. If they didn't have that faith, then either they would have pushed the game out now, FM25, and just tried to make some money, or they may have just cancelled the studio completely and that could have been shut down. So I think they've got a lot of faith, and I hope this means they're going to release a great game for FM26. I assume in the normal October, November sort of slot they usually release games in, but it needs to be a great game. FM26 has to absolutely smash it, or there's going to be some big issues. Remember, they started working on the Unity engine in 2020. They've had 6 years of developing Football Manager for Unity. They chose when they thought it was going to be ready. They gave themselves plenty of leeway, and it's still not ready. There needs to be some sort of admission of, okay, we have messed up here. I mean, the initial plan was to bring the Unity upgrade to FM22, and that would have launched in October-November time 2021. So heading into that development cycle, I'm sure a lot of the team would have been working on Unity and building it up to that big launch. But at some point in that cycle, they thought to themselves, right, this isn't ready yet. We can't release the Unity upgrade. We need more time. And they gave themselves 3 years to do it, which is an awful long time. 3 years to ramp things up and get it ready. And then 3.5 years later, they decide to cancel the planned launch. I mean, if the game was in such a bad state that they've had to delay it from an initial launch date of October and through 2 delays through to March, that's quite a long delay. Surely at the start of the cycle for this upcoming game, they would have looked at development and thought, by looks of things, we aren't going to hit our targets here. Maybe what we should do is just push it back to FM26 instead. And if that is the case, I think it would be pretty easy to be transparent in that regard. You should say, we previously said that FM25 was going to come out with Unity upgrades. However, we are a bit behind on development and we don't want to release a half-baked game, so we're pushing that back to FM26. Instead, for FM25, we're going to stick with the old engine, test a few new features that we want to bring into Unity in FM26, and also have a go with the new Premier League license. I'd have been cool with that. I'm sure many of you would have been cool with that. At least we would have had an up-to-date game to play. So something along the way has gone horrendously wrong. Like really, really badly wrong. And we don't know anything about it. And I'd love to. I'd love them to just come out and say, look, we've made this mistake, this mistake, this mistake. We're learning from it. The more frustrating part for me, like I previously said, is that Sports Interactive said they were going to be way more transparent moving forward. And that just hasn't happened. Since their first tweet officially announcing the game on September 30th, they tweeted 3 more times about the launch, then tweeted the game is delayed until March, and then there's a couple of tweets saying they can't do a data update for FM24 due to licenses, and then they tweeted again saying the game has been cancelled. I'm generally a pretty skeptical person, so it really doesn't sit well with me that they open pre-orders and, what was it, a week, 10 days later, they delayed the game for 4 months. Maybe I can give them the benefit of the doubt that they genuinely did think they were going to have a product ready for release by the end of March. But the speed at which they delayed the game after opening pre-orders suggests to me that it was pretty obvious across the studio this game was never going to launch for its intended release date in November. It feels like they were more interested in just grabbing some cash while they could and then deal with the consequences later on. Now, I don't know who made that call. I'd like to think it's not someone at Sports Interactive. I'd like to think they're owned by Sega, the parent company. They're the one dishing out the orders. I'd like to think it came from there, but I don't know. It doesn't sit right with me. It makes me feel a bit uncomfortable. And the people who were burned by that decision especially are the people who are most loyal to Football Manager. They are the people that pre-order it whatever every single year as soon as it comes out. They're the ones that have been most affected by this. The most loyal fans, the most arguably important fans. Had they switched the narrative around a bit, and before they announced the release date, they said, okay, the game still isn't quite ready yet. We're going to have to delay until March. If you want to pre-order the game, you can. Pre-orders are now open. The game's going to come out in March. I think if they'd done that, there wouldn't have been quite so much backlash or outcry about it. I certainly would feel a bit better about it, but I do find it impossible that something came up in that week, 10 days between pre-orders opening and delaying it for 4 months. I refuse to believe that something came up that was so catastrophic they went from a game that was almost ready to launch to having to delay it 4 months. I just find it impossible that's happened. We also have no idea, actually, as to what has caused all of these delays. The big change, obviously, is that they are switching to the Unity engine, and all the assumptions are switching to Unity and working with Unity. That is the reason the game has been delayed and obviously then cancelled. If that is the case, I think that's very worrying and concerning. The initial plan was to launch Unity in FM22. Imagine if they had done that. Football Manager could be dead right now if that was the case. So trying to read between the lines of the statement, it seems like development was behind schedule and it wasn't going to be up to their usual standards. So I suspect the reason for that is the Unity engine. But obviously we don't know, and I suspect we will never know. And we will never know exactly what state it has been in as well. I'd love to know what the game looked like in November, just before the planned original launch. I'd love to see the build of that game. Like, was the game almost ready and they just had to iron out a few more bugs which actually have taken a bit longer to fix? Now they are fixed pretty much, but actually there's no point launching the game right now because it's so late in the season, so they'll just work on making it really polished for FM26, and they'll add in features that were being taken out of FM25, like international management, and put them back in the game. Or is it a lot worse than that? And the reason we haven't seen any gameplay, because they genuinely just couldn't ship a game at all. Like, it's so far behind in development, there's nothing to ship. I don't know. I get they're not going to show us things that aren't fully finished on the game yet. But I think they could make a lot more of a deal of talking about things that are going into the new game. You know, build some transparency that way. Have constant things going out to keep the audience engaged and keep the audience happy, you know, and feel like they are valued. So going back to the Steam page, for example, in the description, there is this sentence about volumetric player animations. When I first read it, I just assumed it was a fancy word they've used to try and make something sound more impressive than it actually is. I just didn't really read into it that much. However, as it turns out, this is super cool. Volumetric player data is using cameras in actual football stadiums to record the movements of actual football players in actual matches. And then they can use all this data to put into their own animations engine to make the players in-game move and behave more realistically. I mean, that is super cool, right? That feels like cutting-edge technology. Why have they not made a blog post or a video about this, talking about this technology and how it's going to be used in Football Manager? You don't have to show us anything of the game, obviously, if it's not ready, but just having that, talking about what's going to be in this new era of Football Manager would have been so cool and would have bridged a gap in this lack of transparency, this silence that's been from the studio. I think stuff like that could have gone a long way to helping with relations between the studio and its fan base. But instead, there has been pretty much total radio silence from Sports Interactive, and this past year has maybe been a bit of a learning curve for them, and probably a case study for a lot of other organisations out there of how not to handle the social media around a game launch. But it's not just me that feels this way. To help answer the question, what is going on at Football Manager, I've brought Clates along. Clates, how are you feeling?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. No, actually, I'm going to start with that by saying that. Yeah, I'm good. I'm really well. I'm loving life at the moment, in spite of what we're going to chat about today.
I think we are both feeling just a bit apathetic, really, about this whole situation.
Yeah, I think that is the word for it. I think I used the word nonplussed as well when I replied to you. I think we'll get into it, I'm sure, in a bit more detail, but I'm feeling a bit numb about it all. I'm disappointed. I'm sort of seeing things from their side of view. I'm also not understanding certain choices that they made. When I say they, I mean Sports Interactive. And then I'm sort of seeing all of these people who are really, really angry, and I'm struggling to align myself completely with the anger whilst also understanding why they're angry. I don't know if that kind of lines up with how you're feeling, but it is the reason why I've not made a video like this one, which is why I'm really happy to just jump in and have a chat with you, because I feel like we're at least similarly aligned in that. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, I've spoken in this video already about how I feel angry. Not maybe angry is a strong word for it, but I feel let down, disappointed by the lack of transparency and how they've left a lot of people in the lurch, I think. And particularly for me, the biggest thing is, releasing, announcing pre-orders, then delaying it 4 months, a few days later on kind of thing. That really doesn't sit well with me and still doesn't kind of stuff. But yeah, I think I feel just not that fussed by it because of the way it's been handled, and it just felt inevitable, I guess, this was happening.
Yeah, it felt inevitable, but I think I also gave them, too much credit as well, in that I did a stream a couple of days before the announcement of it being cancelled, saying we just don't know, and I'm struggling to feel angry and upset and outraged because at this stage there isn't anything confirmed, even though actually looking back at it and in hindsight the writing wasn't on the wall because there was no communication. There was clearly an issue going on, wasn't there? But yeah, the part of me that was and being involved with Football Manager and knowing some of the people behind the scenes there, part of me was still there going, yeah, but at the moment they are still saying the game's coming out in March. Pre-sales are still available. Let's wait and see. Despite probably knowing in my heart of hearts that something was not looking too good, I was like, is it going to be a delay or is it going to be a cancellation? And then obviously the news comes about the cancellation, and then once you've got the full story and the full picture, then you can start to go and make your decisions on what am I actually let down about, what am I actually disappointed about, what am I close to being angry at, or actually what now gives me enough clarity to know and fully understand why things happen in the way that they did. And I think still I'm trying to join up a few of those dots, but overall I am just a bit like, cool, that's not great.
Yeah, you put it way more eloquently than I could have ever put it, really. I just feel like because there was just such silence and there was no hype really either behind the game, it didn't feel to me like there's a new game coming out at any point. they just announced the game's coming. You'll get some stuff soon on a roadmap. And because nothing was ever properly announced, now whether that's because it just wasn't ready or not, and it was, not in a place to be shown, or because of all these delays, they want to keep hiding the reveals to make sure when they actually do properly announce things, they can do it all, in their own time and make sure people get hyped at the time. But because there was just such lack of anything, I think it never felt to me like there was a new game coming out and there was nothing to be excited about in the first place. So there was nothing then to be too disappointed about either.
Yeah, I think there's probably, perhaps you're similar to me in this, in that I think different people deal with disappointment in different ways. And my way of dealing with disappointment, I think generally, is to kind of go, okay, but what are the positives? What can we do? And obviously you look at everything from your own context and your own personal situation. And me, literally just gone full time, playing this game now, thinking, we've got on the horizon potentially a new game coming up. I mean, according to them, we did have a new game coming up. And then having this, it is a setback, and it makes you worry. And I'm sure you've had those thoughts and those feelings about, what am I going to do for the next 8 months? But my natural disposition, I think, is to go, okay, that means we've got way more time to do this. Well, actually, there's still Football Manager 2024 is a really good game. And actually, the bigger disaster in this, which is a comment that lots of people have been making, is that it would have been worse if they brought out FM25 and it didn't work and it was broken. I don't think a lot of people are saying this, but this delay to March surely would have put so much extra pressure on 26. Whereas I think that's what's happened here, is that they've perhaps not, again, this is conjecture and I'm speculating and maybe being slightly apologetic on their behalf, which is not actually how I feel. But I think, again, my character is to look for the reasons behind things, to try and explain things. Like I said, join up those dots a little bit. I potentially think that there was clearly issues with this development. Obviously, that's why they've cancelled it. But I think they've looked forward and gone, if we do this game like this now, we need to put so much work into this now, and we are losing all of this time for our next release. And actually, what if we don't release this game, our next release, FM26, can basically be what they would have given us for FM25, and it gives them way longer to make sure it's ready. And in that sense, then I think there is that trust thing going on there, but they are on their last degree of trust in that they have to deliver a game for FM26 now. That might end up being a good thing in the long run, is in that they've given themselves the window to actually deliver a really good game rather than constantly kicking the can down the road and get themselves caught up in that, which maybe what's happened here.
Yeah, I agree. I think FM26 has to absolutely smash it. I think if there's any hint of delay or anything like that, then that could be game over. I think potentially they have to release it on time. They have to be more transparent with things, and they have to placate an audience that has lost a lot of trust with them. Yeah. And speaking of their audience, we've got a lot of submissions from you guys, leaving comments on videos, community posts, tweets as well. We want to go through a few of these and talk about them a little bit as well. Right, this first comment comes from Kelland Shaw, and he says, the decision is correct. The fallout will be huge. Heads will roll, miles will be gone after FM26, and who knows what comes next. Microtransactions, DLC, we might look back to FM24 as the good old days in a few years. This was the most liked comment on my YouTube community page. So people obviously feel this sentiment, they resonate with it. I feel like it's a bit extreme for me personally. I don't necessarily think that heads will roll and miles will be gone. I don't think microtransactions are coming into the game. I don't know what you'd have microtransactions for in Football Manager. But I do agree the decision is correct that the game has been cancelled and they're just focusing on 26. I just think this is a bit of an extreme point of view. Yeah,
I think I agree with you, I think, on this one, except for the fact that I think it remains to be seen. I think there will be some type of fallout. There will need to be fingers pointed and questions answered within the studio, and I think from Sega above as well, because what has happened here is not good, and somebody somewhere or something somewhere, they will need to do some type of digging to find out why this has happened. I would kind of just guess that the answer is that they thought that they could develop the game and they haven't been able to, in which case it might be that it's slightly more blameless than this. However, on top of that, there is the whole PR disaster. And I think even if there are reasons to explain away the PR disaster that's happened because of maybe it's come from the higher ups and it's come from Sega, and we've kind of seen why there's been this media blackout. They kind of explain that a little bit. However way you look at it, it's not been a good look, and so there probably will be a fallout and maybe a change. And I can kind of understand why this comment, why this person feels like this, but also why so many people agree with it, because they're sort of then looking at the worst that could happen, because Football Manager SI have kind of made people think about what is the worst that can happen because of the way that this has gone. I agree with you. I don't think that will be the case, and I don't think we'll see things like microtransactions because the studio have been so against those things previously. But maybe if people change, like he's suggesting, if Miles wasn't there anymore, maybe they do change.
The next comment comes from NJBrock22. Personally, I feel it was the call they absolutely had to make, because at best, 25 was going to be a beta for 26. So better for them to focus on getting everything close to perfect as possible for 26, seeing as everything has been a nightmare for them to get to work as in. Right, I've said this 3 times now. I'm not going to say it again. I've messed it up several times, this. But essentially the point being made here is that they think that FM25 was going to be a beta for 26. Now, this is not a sentiment that I particularly agree with. I think if you make the point here that 25 is a beta for 26, then I know it's a new game, right? But essentially with a new engine, but can you not just make the argument that 22 was a beta for 23 and 23 is a beta for 24 because they're adding new things every single game cycle? That's kind of a position that I kind of have. I don't know about you, Clates.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I think the difference with this release was that they were going to be so much closer together, which means that actually the ability to implement new things would have been way more difficult to do. So because it was going to be March to October, say, perhaps there's more of an argument to call it more of a beta, because especially when it's moving to this new engine. I kind of see what he's saying. I also see what you're saying, that every game is sort of that, isn't it? But I think the overall sentiment of this comment, I agree. I think it was the best call they had to make. I think they could have, and I think this is a thing that lots of people are pointing out, they could have released a game that didn't work, and lots of other studios release games that don't work. If that is the worst case scenario. This isn't, even though it seems like it is. I don't think this is the worst case scenario which we have here, as long as they, like we said before, as long as they pull off a really good FM26 release, which, who knows?
Next up, Stick the Man 4873. This moment will probably be the most significant in the franchise's history and could spell a new beginning for the series, or it could just as easily kill it. I'm optimistic, but I'm setting my expectations low in case of any disappointment. It's kind of the point you've just made as well.
Yeah.
What do you think Football Manager need to do to make sure this is successful and doesn't just kill the franchise?
Generally, if they can show us a game, I think what they will need to work hard on the hype. I think you used that word a lot before. Work hard on the hype. I think they also probably, there needs to be some type of communication quite quickly now. And if there is a game that must have been close, like they took pre-sales on this on FM25, so there must have been a game that was not that far away from being able to be released, even if it didn't work. What I think they need to do now is get to a point where the game works. And if the game works and they know that at their lowest level of expectation, they can release a game in October, let's say, that is quite simplified but actually works, they should start building that hype now by showing things that they're implementing. And then anything on top of that, they know that they just need to fix everything so that they have a game to release. And then they've then got the time now to try and make it as best a possible game as they can. I think they need to be showing people that. They need to go back to this transparency thing. And then ultimately, I think they just need to have a game that visually really, they need to deliver something that excuses everything that has gone before it. Because actually, if they do that, if they can show us a game that the graphics engine looks amazing, if the match engine plays really nicely, if the new UI is really intuitive and works really nicely, it is a really big, it answers all the questions. People will then go, oh, okay, so this is why it was delayed, because they were really trying to make it really good and now it's really good. That's easier said than done, of course.
Much easier said than done. I'm with you on that, though. They have to start building some momentum from now, from day zero. They've got to start putting together a content strategy plan, right, to start pushing things out, to start slowly building this hype up, to try and regain some of the trust that has been lost over the last few months or so. And then obviously they've got to execute the game perfectly. There is so much pressure on them now, but they've had essentially 2 years to develop this game. Incredibly, the Unity stuff was first being discussed in 2020 for an FM22 release.
Yeah.
They've had 6 years or so to be working on this Unity engine. I guess it starts obviously with a skeleton crew putting things together, but they've had a long, long time to do this now. This has to hit. And if it doesn't, that's when things get really, really quite serious for the company. But a little bit of silver lining potentially in this next tweet, actually, from Jamie. For what it's worth, I think this bodes well for FM26. They held testing, which means the game works on some sort of basic level. Scrapping 25s means they can focus on 26. I'm optimistic. And this makes a good point. They did hold testing throughout January for members of FMFC. Obviously, that's all under strict non-disclosure agreements. I've not seen anything about it posted anywhere, so people are keeping it quiet. It would assume that they've got a working game. Not necessarily the case. I mean, maybe people went down for testing and were just sat there all day twiddling their thumbs because it was broken. I don't know.
It depends to what degree it was broken, isn't it? I think is the thing there. If it was at least the basic level, it's kind of my point from before, isn't it? That if it was playable enough to have people in there to play it, it does beg the question why there isn't a game, and there must have been bigger flaws and bigger issues involved.
Perhaps all the feedback they got was just, this game is rubbish and need to change everything about it. Maybe that's where the cancellations come from, because suddenly the consumer testing turns out no one likes it. I don't know. I'd be I'd love to see what the game looked like in November when they initially were planning to release. I'd love to know what that level of the game looked like
when they started taking pre-orders. That is a really big point here, and if there is anything in, I think you said it before, if there is anything in the whole process that sparks anger in me rather than just simple plain old disappointment, it is the fact that they allowed people to start paying for the game despite they must have known to some degree that there was going to be some type of struggle. I assume they just thought that they could turn it around, but that's the thing that is probably the biggest problem with everything.
The next comment actually comes from your community page on your post there as well. This is from the Quaz. It's amazing to think if they just cancelled in September-ish last year before opening pre-orders, instead of stringing us along for 6 months, we'd be in the same position, but SI's reputation would be dramatically better off. The screw-up on the PR side is arguably bigger than the game development itself. And I don't think I necessarily agree with the PR being bigger than the game development itself. I think not being a game is a pretty big screw-up, to be fair. Yeah. But I agree that the PR has been really bad on it. If they just switched the order around and said, okay, the game's being delayed until March, but you can now pre-order if you'd like to, as opposed to pre-orders open. Oh, by the way, it's delayed until March a few days later. If that had been switched around a little bit, I think there wouldn't be quite so much anger on the PR side of things.
I think it is. I think a lot of it comes from, I think he's quite right here when it says stringing us along for 6 months. A lot of the anger now, or the lethargic disappointment that we feel right now, comes from, I think we did give them the benefit of the doubt in October, when they initially delayed, and we were like, okay, we'll wait. And then you do wait, and then there's still bad news. I think it's difficult that the fact that it's happened twice is the big problem with this. I think if they'd have known, and if they had cancelled FM25, cancelled it back in September-ish, then actually it may have even given them scope to do an FM25 delayed, but on the same engine type of thing. Do you see how they could have? There could have been a plan in place here to avoid all of this, and a Football Manager 2025 could have come out, which essentially would have been a data update. And maybe that's where these fingers might be pointed in that. What was the contingency here? Because surely they knew that, because it had been something that had been going on since the FM22, that what was the contingency for this not happening, but for it not being ready, for them not being able to make the jump to the new engine? It seems like there just isn't one. It's just, we didn't manage to get it done, so we'll have to skip this one.
Yeah, I think that's what it is essentially. 22 was going to happen, and they said, no, we're going to push it back, not to 23, 24, but we're going to do it for 25.
Yeah.
And yeah, like you see, it seems like there was maybe no contingency plan in place there at all. I think, at some point they were going to have to rip the Band-Aid off and just go for it, essentially. And maybe it's backfired in that regard, because this is what I find interesting as well. So the delay comes in November or October, whenever it was, like a week after pre-orders open. Obviously, at that point, it was very clear that there was not going to be a game in November.
Yeah.
Now, at that point, when they said there's a 4-month delay, was it obvious to them then, okay, this game is not going to come out in March either? But they were just wanting to make sure that there was still something in the pipeline, just in case. I don't know. Like,
Surely
I'd love
not,
to see
but yeah, like it does make you think that, because even delaying till March throws up so many problems in of itself that if they like, because it then becomes so it's FM26 then starts to be eaten up by the late FM25, and you lose sales that way. That it seems like now in hindsight, it seems like a really weird choice to have delayed till March, because especially they're the ones who know what the game looks like and where the development is. So,
yes.
Which is also makes you ask the question now, in that are they confident for FM26, or is this something, are they worried internally of this might not work ever? We might not be able to get it to a point where it works.
I don't want to end this on like a, doom and gloom. We'll never know what's going to happen. What happens? Maybe FM26 is going to be really bad. I don't know. I want to end it on a positive, and it's actually a comment from one of your community posts as well, from Blue Cali. It's a good job FM24 is so bloody good. Best FM ever. I don't mind playing it longer and waiting for the next FM. Releasing a buggy mess of 25 would have made things worse. Would have been the worst thing SI could have done, sorry. And they have done the right thing, even though communication has been very poor. And he does make a good point. FM24 is the best Football Manager game that has ever been released. Yes, okay, at this point, I feel like I've exhausted every single tactic. And whenever I'm doing a rebuild or something like that, it's difficult to try and create a tactic that feels new and isn't overpowered.
It's not even the tactics for me, it's the players. I'm like, I've signed him in about 3 saves now, I can't sign him again. That's the thing for me. It's the tactics. Yeah, it is, like, because I don't know, you can kind of use tactics across different teams, but it's the players. I'm like, I can't. Even on the stream the other day, I was looking for a new striker and I went down the list and there was obvious choices, but I was going, just signed him loads though. Like it seems too meta now to be able to just know who's really good because you've played and used them so much. That's the thing you get from a new game, isn't it? That people don't always mention. It's everything's fresh and new. Not only the new features, but the whole database itself. So yeah,
I completely agree. Yeah, I always try and sign players that I've never heard of before. Even like you say, there's much better options out there. I try to make it different every single time, but it's getting quite difficult now where like I've signed every wonder kid possible, so I can't really. I'm trying to avoid doing like I've got to rebuild with youngsters, I've got to rebuild with old players now to try and get a different sort of flavour of things there and learn a bit more about things. But I think that's a very unique problem to us with the amount of content we create, kind of thing. I think for most people, it's not too much of an issue. And
I'd be shocked if other people have signed all of the players, which is what we're complaining about here.
Anyway, those are our thoughts on it. Let us know down in the comment section what you think of the matter, how it's affecting you, if it is affecting you at all. And do you think Sports Interactive made the right choice in cancelling the game? I'd be interested to know.